Well, welcome to our class on the Parsha, the weekly Parsha, and getting some insights into the weekly Parsha. And one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight is how there are 70 facets to everything we learn in Torah, 70 different levels that you could be learning something. And so I'm going to share a story in the very beginning of this week's Parsha, and we're going to look at it at two different levels, on a level of just an emotional level, but then also we're going to go a little bit deeper on a analytical and spiritual level. And anytime we do any kind of expounding upon something in the Torah, there's 13 principles of exegesis, 13 principles of logic that are required to be able to draw something out from Torah. We're not going to go into those now, but they're in the front of many of the Sidurim. But there's 13 principles of logic, and for the mathematicians, it's obvious. But and I imagine for lawyers, it's probably got some logic, some obvious to it as well. These 13 principles. But for me, I mean, my initial college degree was going to be in liberal arts, so that doesn't. Would you like fries with that? So this week is Parshas Yisro. And so the interesting part about Parshas Yisro is here you have a Parsha that's in the Torah that's named after someone who wasn't Jewish. And we ask, what is his contribution? And that's what we want to talk about. That's the beginning of what Parshas Yisro is about, because obviously the contribution had to be sufficient that a whole Parsha was named after him, right? So here's the interesting piece. So Moshe comes out of Egypt, and they have the the sing and dance at the Red Sea. They come out of Egypt. They're traveling through. His father-in-law brings his wife and children, brings Moshe's wife and children to join them. Moshe goes out. If Moshe is going to go greet him, then obviously Aaron goes out to greet him, and obviously then the high court comes out. Everybody goes out. It was a royal greeting for Moshe's father-in-law, and they see that Yisro sees that Moshe is sitting in court all day. He's sitting and people are coming to ask his advice, to seek his counsel. And obviously you have a nation of 6 million adult men plus women and children. They're coming to Moshe for the counsel. That's a long, long line. That's a long, long line. And so Yisro, his father-in-law, says this is not sustainable. You can't keep this up. It's going to wear you out. And besides, it's not respectful to the people. They have to wait all day just to have a word from you. You need to create a new system. And here's the system I suggest. And you find wise, solid, justful people, and they should sit in judgment over 1,000, over 100, over 50, over 10. And so you have a tier, which is the system we're used to now, right? But that's the suggestion that he comes into. That's the organizational plan that he comes up with. Now, and he says to Moshe, if you think I'm wrong, go ask God, see what he says. But this is not going to work, right? So that's the basic problem, is that we want to stop and understand, why did it take Yisro, because everybody loves a father-in-law, right? Why did it take Yisro to come in and tell him how he ought to be doing things? Here's Moses, the leader of the Jewish people, right? Mm-hmm. All these miracles and everything. And he comes from a line of leaders of the Jewish people. And then comes the father-in-law and tells him, this is wrong. You need to redo this, right? There's a better way to do this. So we have to ask the question, is like, why is it that Yisro has to be the one to come and make a suggestion of something which has to be logical? Yeah. It's a simple, when you talk about leadership, you have to break it down into ranks, right? Yeah, it makes sense. So the first answer, just on an emotional tone, right? The first answer is just respect. Just respect. Moshe can't say, we're going to break it up and we're going to have tears, because that message then is I don't have time for all of you. Talk amongst yourselves, right? That's the message that would be coming if Moses suggests it, right? On the flip side, if one of the Jewish people comes up and says, we need to have a new system, so that's disrespectful to the leader. Like you don't want to wait. I'm not important enough that you want to take my time. We'd all rather speak to Moshe than to somebody else, right? But whoever's going to come up with that suggestion, it's not nice. On an emotional level, it's just not nice, right? But for a father-in-law, that's normal. So it is Yisro that has to be able to come and suggest this, because he's the only one who can come in and say this is not sustainable, and not for you, and not for you. It's just not sustainable. He's objective enough. He's a foreigner enough to be able to step in and say this, right? So that's on a simpler level, right? But let's take this a little bit deeper. Let's take this deeper. Moshe is the leader of Kol Yisrael. He's already been through so much. He doesn't know that would be a better system. He can't come up with this idea of his own. What is he thinking that as a leader he doesn't already suggest a tiered ranking system to be the most effective and most efficient, right? So we have to ask that question. And where is Moses coming from? Moses is coming from a totally spiritual level. Whatever the problems are that are coming to Moshe, his perspective is, if you elevate yourself, if you become holier and wiser and see a bigger picture, these squabbles, these internal squabbles and challenges don't exist if you just see a higher perspective. So I'm going to take an example from a different field here. When I deal with situations, for example, of someone considering suicide, it's almost always someone who's much younger. Why? They don't have the life experience to see that they can survive this catastrophe that's in front of them. Someone who's past 60, how awful is this already? Right? We've seen so much already, and we've survived so much already. We see a bigger picture, right? So Moses' perspective is that when someone comes to him, he'll lift them up spiritually. He will help them see a greater and broader perspective. And from that higher spiritual level, challenges, the problems aren't big things. They're not serious issues, right? So that's his goal, is one by one, he wants to lift up every single Jew to a higher level so that the problems don't exist anymore. They dissipate, they're gone. They're not issues. Fascinating thing that if we, when we study the Lubavitcher Rebbe's teachings, his teaching style often is, he'll come and he'll present a problem, and he'll tell you how, and he'll show you 2 or 3 examples of how serious a problem this is, right? And then he'll give you a possible solution to how you would understand it, and the solution looks really good. And then he'll tell you why that completely doesn't work. And he'll do that with 2 or 3 different answers that you think are great answers, and they'll tell you why those answers really aren't good either. And then he's going to go back and he's going to show you on a foundational level how there was really never a question to begin with. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about Moses lifting us up. Moses wanted to lift up each person to a higher vision, a higher spiritual level, so that whatever the challenges are, they're not real challenges. They're things that we deal with and overcome, but they're not as concerning and consternating as they appear. That's his goal, right? So rather than delegating responsibilities down the chain, he wants to lift everyone up so the problems disappear. That's what he wants to do, right? Along comes his father-in-law, who says, that's nice, it's a beautiful idea, but this nation is going into Israel, and they're going to be facing wars, and then they're going to be facing overcoming the land and tilling the land and raising the farm. They're going to be very busy in the physical world. They need to be able to deal with stuff in the physical realm, on a down here day-to-day earthly level of things. And so there's no time and there's no patience to lift everybody up to the holiest level. You have to be more pragmatic. You have to be more pragmatic. And therefore, you have to create this environment. Now, at Mount Sinai, we see an interesting phenomenon that happens, right? At Mount Sinai, the entire Jewish people are gathered together at the foot of the mountain, Ish echad v'lev echad, one heart, one mind. They're totally united. They're receiving the Torah from God, and their spiritual level is the highest it's ever been as a nation. Not as an individual like Abraham or Isaac or Jacob. As a nation, we're at the highest spiritual level we've ever been. And we're about to receive the Torah from God on Mount Sinai. And the first of the 10 commandments, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, that I am Lord your God, is so overwhelming that their souls leave the body to join the spiritual unity of God. But that leaves the body dead on the ground. So God then commands all of the souls to go back into the body. And let's do this next one. So the second commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. And again, the soul aspires to join, to be consumed within the greater godliness of the revelation of godliness here in the world. And God said, that's not the point. All the souls back in the bodies, right? And at that point, the Jewish people say, okay, time out. That worked 2 in a row, but let's not go for 3. I don't know if this resurrection thing is going to happen every time, so let's just stop here, right? God, you talk to Moses. Moses, you talk to God. Moses, you come and tell us what God said. So the rest of the 8 commandments were transferred from God through Moses to the entire Jewish people at Mount Sinai. Now, granted, everything's in the first 2. All of the positive commits come about because of I am God, your God. All of the do not do commandments follow the idea of you'll have no other gods before me. So in a sense, they've covered everything. Truth is, Kabbalistically, the first letter of the first commandment is the letter Aleph in Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Anochi is I. The letter Aleph, what is the letter Aleph? The shape of the letter Aleph is a little yud above and a little yud below in a line that joins them. This is God, this is the Jewish people, this is the mitzvahs that join them. But that's on a Kabbalistic level. But on a practical level, hey, I've died twice today. I don't want to go for 3 here. And so we already see that the Jewish people have this idea of too much revelation, too much spiritual. I got to deal with the physical. I'm a physical body down here in a physical world. I got to deal with the physical elements, right? So therefore, the idea is that we want to, Moses' idea is to lift everybody up, but his father-in-law is saying, practically speaking, we have to deal with the here and now. Now, what happened about previous to leaving Egypt? Yes, there were tribes, and within each tribe there was already a system, a paternal system of, you go to your father goes to his father, you go to the leader of the tribe. There already was a structure there, but it wasn't as deep as the structure that Yisro is suggesting, because it was still very much a family and very tribal. But now we've grown so big, we've kind of outgrown the family tier system, right? The 10 Commandments were given orally by God on Mount Sinai, and then Moses wrote it down on the tablets, or God wrote it down on the tablets, handed it to Moses, and said, take it on down, right? So yes, it was orally presented by God to everyone. First 2 to everyone, and the next 8 to Moses, and then he transmitted. But then afterwards, there's it written on the tablets of stone, which are not rounded, they're cubed. The Talmud tells us they were cubed. I know that the popular version is the one, but that comes from Michelangelo. That's not a Jewish thing at all. They're cubes. The Talmud says they're cubes. Michelangelo made tablets. I don't know, maybe it's easier to keep the statue standing. I don't know. So the idea then is that we saw at Mount Sinai that people already asked for an intermediary, right? Because people need to be people, they can't be angels. And so we need to be able to make a sustainable system, which is where we have a set of courts. Each one goes to courts of 10 or 100, 50 or 100 or 1,000. You go up the tier system depending on the challenges of the class itself, right? So ideally, who wouldn't want to speak to Moses, right? Obviously would like to speak to Moses. Even in my lifetime, there was a time when the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Sundays, he would hand out crisp single dollar bills to anyone who came by, encouraging them to give tzedakah. And whoever came would get a blessing, and they would get $1, which of course they would then keep the $1 because it came from the hand of the Rebbe. But then they would redeem that $1 by giving tzedakah. They'd be $5 or $100, something else. And so by doing this, the Rebbe increased tzedakah. Usually in tzedakah, you have a giver and you have a receiver. Here you have a giver to a transmitter to a third person, and it expands on that as well. So it was increasing tzedakah in a tremendous way. But it gave thousands of people every Sunday an opportunity to have that face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who's like the Moses of our generation. And so he was able, that transaction, that meeting, able to lift people up in spiritual ways. That's phenomenal. And many stories abound about this. Now's not the time for it, but the idea is there's an ideal way to do this, a spiritual elevation that removes the problems. But then there's also the more sustainable way, because Moses was not going to be with us when we go to Israel. So in a more sustainable way for the future generations is a necessary thing. So this was so important, but again, it has to come through Yisro, who's not in the mix. And so he's coming up with this other idea of sustainability. And that's why the Parsha is named after Yisro, because of this tremendous contribution he made, which is, yes, ideally, we should all be holy and spiritual. Practically speaking, we need a system that actually works and works to communicate people. So that's in a nutshell, a little piece from this week's Parsha. And the lesson that we can learn from Yisro. And on the surface, we could just read, Yisro came up with a good idea, and so it was adopted. But if we look deeper, we understand, hang on a second, there's multiple layers of this. Like, Moses couldn't figure this out himself. What's going on over there? We have to ask those deeper questions. We have to analyze those other deeper pieces, and we learn so much more by going deeper into that piece of it.
Was this system adopted or imposed?
Adopted.